49 years ago, in the midst of a harsh Alaskan winter, a young woman named Annabelle Reed vanished on her way home after her school's winter dance, disappearing without a trace, leaving her family and the entire town of Kai gripped by fear. The police at the time believed she had met with an accident in the blizzard, but nobody was found, and the investigation quickly reached a dead end. However, over the decades, Annabelle's mother and a few others refused to accept that explanation, convinced that something darker was hidden beneath the ice of Lake Kenai. Then, one spring day as the lake thawed, a horrifying discovery revealed a secret buried for 41 years, turning the entire case in a direction no one could have anticipated. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love seeing cold cases solved, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on future stories. In February 1976, Kai, a small town nestled by the frozen mouth of an Alaskan river, was blanketed in thick snow, the sky hanging low, almost touching the grey wooden rooftops. Winter here lasted more than half the year, and the cold made every sound feel distant, as if swallowed by the dense air. That night, Kai Central High School glowed with golden light from the end-of-term winter dance. Music from old speakers echoing through the hall, mingling with the howling wind outside. Annabelle Reed, 19 years old, wore a simple cream-colored wool dress, her smile bright in the quick snapshots taken among friends. As the dance ended, snow began to fall more heavily, large flakes drifting like scraps of white paper in the air. Annabelle put on her grey shearling coat, donned the red wool hat her mother had recently knitted, said goodbye to everyone, and mentioned she'd drive home before the weather worsened. A few people saw her green Ford F-100 quietly turn toward the coastal road, a road rarely travelled on nights when icy winds swept across the river's mouth. The next morning, snow still blanketed the town. Annabelle wasn't in class, nor had she come home. Her room remained tidy, her bed undisturbed, her alarm clock frozen at its usual time. Her parents called neighbors, then friends and teachers, all giving the same answer. No one had seen Annabelle since that night. As the pale midday light filtered through frosted windows, Margaret Reed picked up the rotary phone, her voice trembling as the operator connected her to the Kenai police station. "My daughter didn't come home last night," she said, each word lost in the wind howling outside the porch. The operator noted it down, voice steady and slow. "Missing person report Annabelle Reed, 19 years old. Outside the snow kept falling, thick and silent as if hiding something from the night before." Police Chief Harold Warren was the first to arrive at the Reed family's home that late afternoon. He knew Annabelle, a kind girl who always greeted him on the street. So when he heard of her disappearance, a flicker of unease crossed the usually calm face of the seasoned officer. Lauren stood on the wooden porch, looking out at the ice-covered road. The town of Kai was engulfed in an early-season blizzard, visibility reduced to a few meters, the wind whipping so fiercely that the pine trees around the house swayed. He told his deputy, "We need to start now before it gets completely dark." An hour later, orders were issued. The local police, militia, and volunteers split into small groups, each equipped with flashlights, radios, and maps of the area. They moved slowly, probing the knee-deep snow with sticks. Along the coastal road, the wind blew in gusts as if trying to erase every trace of the previous night. Snow covered all evidence. No tire tracks, no footprints, no clear direction. Volunteer hunters were sent into the woods along the Kenai River, where Annabelle might have wandered if her truck had broken down. They followed old trails, sometimes only marked by dark rows of trees like ink streaks on the white snow. The radios crackled in the cold wind, fragmented voices breaking through. No one found anything but silence. On the second day, the storm hadn't let up. A militia team reported over the radio that they'd found strange tire tracks, not clearly from a truck or a pickup, deeply embedded in the snow, near a turnoff to Lake Kenai. Fresh snow had nearly covered them, but the track showed a vehicle had driven in and then turned back. Lauren drove to the scene. He crouched down, picked up a handful of snow, and examined it, saying softly, his voice fading in the wind, "If she went this way, her truck might have gotten stuck." He ordered the search expanded toward the lake. That entire afternoon, flashlight beams flickered across the gray snow like fireflies in the night. When the snowstorm paused at dawn the next day, a faint sun broke through thick clouds, and the third search team spotted a dark object against the white expanse. It was the green Ford F-100, tilted to one side, its rear wheels half buried in snow, the front facing the frozen Lake Kenai. The door was unlocked. Inside, the driver's seat bore a faint imprint of someone who had sat there with the gray wool coat and handbag neatly placed on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. The odometer stopped at a random number. There were no signs of a crash or struggle, only an eerie sense of absolute absence, as if the girl had simply stepped out and vanished into the snow. Lauren walked around the truck, jotting notes in his old leather notebook. He studied the snow's surface around it. Smooth, not a single footprint. Only wind swept ripples of fresh snow over older layers. A young officer snapped photos, his breath forming clouds in the air. Lauren muttered almost to himself. She got out of the truck, but where did she go? He ordered a temporary barrier set up, marked the coordinates with wooden stakes, and sent a report back to the station. In the dispatch room, the typist recorded the first summary for the case file. Vehicle abandoned, owner missing for unknown reasons. As dusk fell, the police vehicle's lights formed a lonely chain of yellow glow against the vast snow. No one spoke. Only the wind and the faint click of the camera broke the silence, as if the land itself was trying to swallow every trace of the young woman who had just vanished. On the morning of the third search day, Kai's sky was pale as thin ice. Weak sunlight reflected off the snow, forcing everyone to squint, and police cars lined the road, their exhaust mixing with the cold to form a faint mist around the scene. Harold Lauren crouched beside Annabelle's Ford F-100, his old black leather gloves dusted with snow. He ordered the investigator to photograph the entire scene with a Polaroid camera. Every angle of the truck, the ground, the surrounding area, each photo fresh from the camera, froze in the cold, the chemicals spreading slowly, leaving ghostly silver-gray images. There were no signs of a struggle. The door wasn't pried open. The windows were intact. The driver's seat undisturbed. No skid marks, no debris on the road. Everything looked like a vehicle left behind because its owner had urgent business, except for one detail. Near the driver's door in the white snow, a single teal wool glove lay abandoned, nearly buried by the wind. Lauren lifted it gently with the tip of his pen, turning it over. It was wet and cold, no blood, just a few strands of shearling from the coat. He signaled for the evidence team to bag it in nylon. "Mark the location. Take close-ups," he said, his voice low and steady, betraying no emotion, though his hand gripping the notebook trembled slightly. Wind from the lake swept in, carrying powdery snow that covered the fresh footprints. Within 5 minutes, the ground around the truck was smooth again, as if no one had ever walked there. "The wind's too strong, it won't hold tracks," a young officer said. Lauren only nodded, staring into the vast emptiness. In the distance, Lake Kenai's frozen surface gleamed like a giant mirror reflecting the gray sky. He circled to the back of the truck, crouching to inspect it. A streak of dried mud clung to the metal trim of the rear door, dark and distinct from the snow and fine sand around. He scraped a small sample into a paper bag with a knife, labeling it Sample B1, rear door residue. In his notes he added, "Mud color inconsistent with area needs comparison." The scene felt too clean, too orderly, as if someone had tidied it. No other tire tracks nearby. No drag marks. One investigator remarked quietly, "If she got out, there should at least be a direction she went. But this wind could erase anything in an hour." Lauren looked up. The sky wasn't snowy, but the air was thick, silent enough to hear the camera's faint clicks. He sighed, his voice from the cold. Maybe she walked for help and got lost in the storm. That sentence was recorded verbatim in the scene report, later becoming the case's temporary conclusion. By noon, the search expanded. A map was spread across a police car's hood, penciled lines stretching 10 mi around the area, from the riverbank woods to the northern lake shore. The militia split into pairs, each carrying radios, flashlights, flare guns, and minimal rations. They moved in lines 10 mi apart, scanning every tree, every icy sandbank. Calls of Annabelle echoed, lost in the white expanse. Sometimes only the cold, empty echo answered. By day end, snow began falling again, covering the searchers' footprints. As dusk settled, the last light glinted oddly off the green truck's hood. Lawrence stood there for a long time, staring at the abandoned vehicle like a silent witness. He closed his notebook and ordered the scene cleared. Over the radio, his voice was slow, weary. "Extend the search west another 5 miles. We can't stop tonight." As the police cars rolled away, snow covered their tire tracks, restoring the road's initial stillness, as if no one had ever stopped there, as if no young woman had vanished in this blizzard. In the days that followed, Kenai remained shrouded in blinding white. The snow stopped, but the biting wind carried clouds of icy dust obscuring visibility. Search teams persisted, combing the lake area, old trails, hillsides, and frozen fields where traps were set for game. Each day they covered dozens of miles, marking searched areas with red-painted wooden stakes. But the result was always silence. No footprints, no blood, no items beyond the teal glove and the mud sample from the truck. After 5 days, the search radius doubled, encompassing the eastern town limits where snow reached waist-deep. A civilian plane was deployed, circling Lake Kenai for unusual signs on the ice, but aerial photos showed only natural cracks from temperature shifts. In the gray-silver afternoon light, everything blended, white, cold, and empty. At the police station, Lauren compiled a list to interview Annabelle's friends, teachers, and neighbors. Every conversation yielded the same. She had no reason to leave town. No debts, no conflicts. A teacher mentioned she planned to attend college in Anchorage. A close friend said she'd applied for a summer part-time job. No signs of depression, no instability, nothing suggesting Annabelle wanted to disappear. "That girl was always on time, always helping others," an elderly neighbor said through tears. "There's no way she'd just leave." Lauren recorded every statement, but each page added thickness to the file without offering direction. On the 8th night, a middle-aged man came to the station with a tip. He lived near the Kenai Bridge, about 3 miles from where the truck was found. He said that during the storm that night, while securing his horse stable, he saw headlights flash through his window, pausing on the bridge for a few minutes before going dark. "I thought it was a police car," he said. "The lights looked like theirs, not a civilian's." Lauren paused, then asked, "Are you sure it was that night?" The man nodded firmly. "Yes, the wind was fierce. I remember it clearly." The tip was noted, but there was no corroborating evidence. No one else saw the lights, and the bridge was snow-covered before investigators arrived. In the report, Lauren's final note read, "Vehicle unidentified. Insufficient grounds for criminal suspicion. By the 10th day, volunteers were exhausted, supplies dwindled, and radios often lost signal due to interference. Teams rotated back to town, leaving only the core police and a few terrain-savvy militia. One rare sunny morning, Lauren stood on the lake's edge, surveying the vast area. The thick ice beneath him reflected blinding light. He knew the search was nearing its limit. Each hour reduced the chance of finding someone alive, but what troubled him more was the absence of any signs. No tracks, no evidence, as if the girl had never been on that road. That evening, in the yellow-lit office, Lauren opened the thin case file with its darkening Polaroid photos. In one corner, the Ford F-100 stood out against the blurry snow, small and solitary. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the cold air. A young officer stepped in, reporting briefly, "We've covered the 10-mi radius. Nothing new." Lauren nodded, closed the file, his eyes lingering on the reports line. "Risk. Maybe she walked for help and got lost in the storm. It sounded hollow now, but he had no other theory. 2 weeks after the missing person report, snow fell again, light but thick, covering everything. The search was officially paused. Police retrieved equipment and returned to Kenai. California Road reopened to traffic, and the Ford F-100 was towed to the department's impound lot for further investigation. At the station's yard, snow piled on police car hoods, forming a glistening ice layer under streetlights. In the final report, Lauren wrote briefly, "No additional evidence found. Case remains missing person. Cause unknown." As he signed, the clock neared midnight. Wind from the river mouth howled, a chilling sound signaling that Alaska's winter was far from over. By late February, as the season's final storms weakened, the search for Annabelle Reed officially ended. Chief Harold Lawrence signed the final report, the thin paper trembling in the draft from a cracked window. On his desk, a row of numbered evidence bags, the teal wool glove, a few dried soil samples from the truck's rear door, Polaroid photos of the scene yellowed by frost. Everything was packed into a brown cardboard box, sealed with the Kenai Police Department's red wax stamp, labeled 760214 missing person. The report's final page typed neatly concluded insufficient evidence for criminal case. A short, cold sentence that sent a 19-year-old's disappearance into the shadows of time. Lauren sat silently long after signing. On the desk, a half-burned cigarette ash scattered across a map of the Lake Kenai area, where he and hundreds had searched for 2 weeks, finding nothing but snow. He knew the investigation had no direction, yet couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. A misplaced piece, an unseen detail. He folded the map, tucked it into a drawer. Orders from above were clear. Close the file until new information arises. When the Ford F-100 was towed in, snow blanketed its hood, tire tracks trailing along the town road before vanishing under fresh ice. In the impound yard, it sat among rows of seized vehicles, a tarp over it gradually freezing. The remaining evidence, coat, handbag, keys, was neatly packed in a separate box sealed alongside the case file. A young officer asked quietly, "If she comes back for it, how will she know where to find the truck?" Lauren replied without turning, "She's not coming back." For the Reed family, the decision was a silent sentence. Margaret, Annabelle's mother, walked to the lake area daily, placing small pine branches along the road as if marking a path home for her daughter. Her husband, Walter Reed, a winter hunter, extended his search a few more miles, carrying an old photo of his daughter to every house in the area, asking if anyone saw her that night. The answers were always headshakes. Some avoided his gaze, others offered, "She probably got lost in the storm." But Margaret didn't believe it. "I grew up here." "So did my daughter," she said. "A storm doesn't swallow people." Each night their small wooden house cast a faint yellow light onto the snow. By the window a candle burned, flickering in the wind. From 1977 onward, Annabelle Reed's disappearance faded into oblivion, like the ice covering Lake Kenai each winter. Case file #760214 was stored in the county archive on a cold steel shelf, among hundreds of other cases. Thefts, collisions, minor missing persons. The sealed brown box bore a faint red wax stamp, handwritten in black ink. Reed Annabelle, missing person. February 1976. Each year an archivist dusted it off, noted the inspection date and returned it to its place. No one opened it. No one asked. Time in Alaska's harsh climate didn't just fade the ink on paper. Humidity in the storage seeped into the Polaroid photos, blurring the scene images, their edges curling, colors bleeding like frost. The evidence bag with the teal glove grew damp, the nylon brittle, the seal peeling. The mud sample from the truck's rear door crumbled, its label faded, the note sample B1 rear door residue barely legible. New archivists unfamiliar with the box's contents worked from a sparse digital catalogue that hadn't fully updated older records. Meanwhile, Harold Lauren continued his career. In late 1978, he left Kai for Anchorage, appointed as a regional inspector for southern Alaska. There he was seen as a seasoned, disciplined officer, nicknamed Iron Lauren by colleagues. When asked about Annabelle Reed's case, he'd shake his head. No evidence, nothing more to do. A reasonable answer, unquestioned. To most, it was just another cold case among the many disappearances in this unforgiving land. In Kenai, a new police chief took over, and the old archive was moved to a new building due to mold. During the transfer, boxes were dropped, some evidence bags mixed up. They were sorted by labels alone, and since Annabelle's case was no longer a priority, box number 76214 was filed under closed non-criminal. No one noticed that a page detailing the soil sample and Lauren's initial notes was missing. The carbon copy scene reports, thin blue sheets stuck together, their text faded, nearly illegible. By the 1980s, investigative technology began to change. The Alaska State Police introduced training courses on soil trace analysis and organic samples while building the first forensic lab in Anchorage, but Annabelle's case was never sent there. In the list of old cases sent for review to assess reopening potential, file hash 760214 was overlooked. Lauren, then working in Anchorage with approval authority, might have seen the case name but never mentioned it. Nothing seemed unusual, and no one suspected otherwise. In Kenai, the Reed family still lived in their old house. Walter passed away in 1983 from a hunting accident, leaving Margaret alone. She continued her ritual of lighting a candle every February by the window facing the lake. Some neighbors said that on quiet nights, the light reflected off the thin snow like a solitary star, but the town had forgotten. Younger generations only heard of the disappearance as an old tale, a vague warning about the brutality of Alaskan blizzards. In 1989, a minor earthquake cracked the back wall of the county archive. During inspection, many shelves were found damp, papers moldy, nylon bags rotting. Among them was Annabelle Reed's box, its sealing tape loose, corners yellowed. A temp worker replaced the wax seal, resealed it, and noted, "Missing pages 47, missing sample B1. The box was then placed on a higher shelf near the ceiling, rarely touched. From then on, no one opened it again. 2 decades passed, everything gathering dust. In Anchorage, Harold Lauren had retired early due to heart issues, moving to the suburbs. He rarely spoke of his time as a canine officer. On his old desk, a framed photo remained. The 1976 search team standing in the snow, eyes on the camera. The small Ford F-100 tilted in the ice behind them. No one in the photo knew that 40 years later, that same truck would emerge from the melting ice, dragging with it a past they thought was buried. But in 1990, no one could imagine this. For Kai, file W76024 was just a faded number in a long list of unsolved missing persons cases. One of hundreds of names covered by the ice of time, lying silent in the archive shadows, waiting for an unwitting hand to open it. In early 1991, the Alaska Department of Justice launched a program to review all unresolved missing persons cases from the past 2 decades. A special inspection team was sent to each county to check archived files, cross-reference new data, and determine reopening potential. Kai, with its outdated archive behind the administrative building, was among the first stops. The storage room was damp, smelling of moldy paper and rusted metal, the walls still bearing cracks from the earlier earthquake. When 2 state inspectors opened the heavy steel door, dust rose like smoke. The file boxes were lined up, each a silent piece of the town's memory. A local staff member handed them the catalogue of missing persons cases. Some resolved, others never closed. File hash 760214 read, Annabelle was listed as entry 37, noted as non-criminal, closed 1976. No one in the group knew the story. To them, it was just an old file for procedural review. They brought the box to a table under dim yellow light. The wax seal had faded, the black ink label barely legible. Inside were blurred Polaroid photos, creased reports, and a small dark leather-bound notebook. One inspector, Raymond Burke, carefully opened it, The first page bore bold, slanted handwriting. Harold Lawrence, the chief, who led the 1976 investigation. In the middle was a hand-drawn map of the area where the truck was found. The coastal road, forest edge, and a small bridge symbol with a brief note. Bridge, Burke frowned. That bridge was in a different direction. For the official report, the Ford F-100 was found on California Road, nearly 5 miles from the Kenai Bridge. He flipped to the next page where Lauren noted briefly about weather, wind direction, and a faded line. Last sighting near bridge. Burke looked at his colleague and said quietly, "Does this seem off to you? If the truck was on California, why does the notebook mention the bridge?" The other shrugged. "Could be a mislabel. Snow was thick. They might have mixed up the location." They continued reviewing, but no other official map existed for comparison. Middle pages were stuck together. Some ink faded, leaving only scattered numbers. At the notebook's end was a note Burke read slowly, almost whispering. "Revisit site waterline lower than expected." "No date, no confirming signature," Burke asked the archivist. "Any idea why this was labeled non-criminal?" The response, "Not sure, probably no evidence of a crime. It's old." Lauren handled it. The name made Burke pause. He vaguely recalled Lauren, retired years ago, mentioned in industry briefings as an old exemplar. Burke sighed, closed the notebook, and handed it to his colleague. "Note this. We might need to send it to the main office for cross-checking." But when the clerk opened the checklist, Red Annabelle was marked no further action, meaning no further investigation unless new information surfaced. Per protocol, they photographed the notebook's cover, stamped it, reviewed, and returned it to the box. The leather notebook was wrapped in brown paper, resealed with a new stamp and a note added. Contains hand-drawn field notes by Chief H. Lauren. Reference discrepancy with report location. The box was pushed to the topmost shelf, rarely visited. As they left the archive, snow began falling again outside the narrow window. White flakes settling on the old foggy glass. One inspector glanced back, a lingering unease in his chest, but then walked out, slamming the steel door behind them. The lock clanged, then fell silent. The small notebook with its drawing and bridge note lay still in the dark among other file boxes. A missed clue, waiting years for someone to see it again. Outside, Kenai continued its familiar rhythm. No one remembered Annabelle Reed, nor knew that in the cold room behind the administrative building, a hand-drawn map slept. A small misplaced sketch that could have shifted the entire case if anyone had noticed. In April 2016, winter finally gave way in Kenai. Snow melted slowly from wooden rooftops, trickling onto still icy roads. After 40 years, Lake Kenai, frozen each winter like a giant silver mirror, began to crack. Dark water rising, reflecting the weak early spring sun. A state meteorological survey team was sent to measure ice thickness and monitor water level changes. They set up a small tent on the shore, bringing an old sonar, measuring rods, and an underwater camera for data collection. The work was repetitive, monotonous, until the morning of the third day. When a young engineer named Mason lowered the camera into shallow water near the lake's edge, a blurry image appeared. A large rectangular object, angular, tilted. "Looks like a metal frame," Mason said, adjusting the focus. Mud and algae covered it, but the outline was clear. A colleague leaned closer to the screen, frowning. "Looks like a vehicle body." They lowered an LED light, rotating the camera. Through the cold water, the shape emerged. A vintage truck, its body encrusted with brown moss and dark sand. The water's surface was still, reflecting only the sun's dull gold. Mason stood, voice tense. "We need to call the police." That afternoon, Kenai police and a rescue dive team arrived. The area was cordoned off. The thin ice cut to lower equipment. As murky water stirred, the vehicle's frame became clearer. Faded silver lettering appeared through the moss on the hood. Ford 5th 100. A young officer saw the rusted license plate at the back, reading softly, AK 1975, 3821. "God," he whispered. "It matches an old case." They worked for 3 hours to recover the truck. Steel cables tightened around the frame, a winch pulling slowly, water spilling onto the patchy ice. As the front emerged, mud and algae fell like rain, revealing a faded green body, paint peeling in patches. The left door hung open, hinges rusted. The interior filled with sand and decayed leaves. The driver's seat was warped, its metal frame bent, springs exposed like bones. The rear wheels were lodged in mud, suggesting the truck was pushed backward into the lake, not naturally drifted. When divers opened the truck bed, the team stood silent. Amid the mud were human bone fragments, not intact, just a partial skull and a few ribs. In the sludge, light glinted on something brighter, a silver necklace caught in the seat frame. Its oval pendant was engraved with AR. An officer used tongs to place it in an evidence bag, his hand trembling despite familiarity with death. Nearby they found a small rusted pistol, its short barrel green, a Colt .38 commonly used by police in the 1970s. The sun sank, light shifting to bronze. The truck was loaded onto a tow vehicle covered with a thick tarp. News spread quickly. That evening, KSRM radio reported briefly a vintage truck was found in Lake Kenai, possibly linked to a 1976 missing persons case. In the police office, an older deputy rifled through the file cabinet, hand shaking as he pulled out the old brown box. The faded label was still legible. Reed Annabelle missing person, February 1976. The next day, the Anchorage Forensic Lab received the truck. Thunder-white lab lights. Mud was scraped from the body bit by bit. Inside, they found grey fabric scraps clinging to the seat frame, matching the wool coat. Annabelle wore the night she vanished. Technicians measured the distance between the seat and steering wheel, noting the gear shift in park. The door opened toward the lake. All suggested the truck didn't roll into the water on its own. Someone drove or pushed it, abandoning it as the rear wheels sank into mud. In the report sent to the department, the commander wrote, "Vehicle found in Lake Kenai, not California as reported in 1976. Location matches bridge notation in Harold Warren's hand-drawn sketch." That small note, initially a technical detail, would become pivotal for the investigation ahead. When preliminary forensic results were released, police confirmed the license plate and chassis matched the Ford F-100 registered to Walter Reed, Annabelle's father. Bone samples were sent for DNA testing, and days later an official statement followed. Victim identity confirmed. Annabelle Reed missing since February 1976. After 40 years, a case the town had forgotten resurfaced. Older residents in roadside cafes recalled the girl with the red wool hat, while younger ones knew only the stories. Margaret Reed, now nearly 80, was the first informed by police. She sat silently, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the window where snow was melting. Outside, wind rippled the lake surface, small waves stirring like the slow breath of something awakening after a long sleep. In Kai's police offices, file HVACA 760214. A case dormant for 4 decades was reopened, carrying the scent of thawing ice and a truth still buried in the deep mud of the past. 3 days after the Ford F-100 was pulled from Lake Kenai, the Alaska State Police issued an official statement. The 1976 Annabelle Reed missing persons case was reopened, the first time in 40 years. File number 76024 was transferred from Kenai's County Archive to Anchorage, along with all new evidence from the scene. The press release was brief, but for those who knew the town's history, it was seismic. A case thought buried with the ice had returned. Detective Laura McCabe from the state's cold case unit was assigned to lead. Known for her meticulousness and ability to relive old cases, McCabe, about 40, was reserved, her eyes sharp and cold. On her desk, she placed the old brown file box, its 40-year journey intact. Next to newly sealed evidence bags, bone samples, a silver necklace, a rusted pistol, and grey fabric. "It all starts here," McCabe told her assistant. With that truck, the first step was re-examining all evidence with modern forensics. Anchorage's lab used mitochondrial DNA analysis, capable of tracing tiny samples, a technique unavailable in 1976. Technicians worked days extracting samples from bones, stray hairs on the coat, and decayed seat fabric. They also analyzed oil residue and mud in the truck to pinpoint when it sank. In the lab, machines hummed steadily, white light reflecting off glass sample containers. McCade stood at the observation window, arms crossed, watching the process as if time itself was unraveling. When results arrived, the report's first line was clear. Mitochondrial DNA matches 99.9% with hair sample from Margaret Reed. Confirmed mother-daughter relation. The victim was Annabelle Reed. Another report section caught McCade's attention. The truck's estimated submersion didn't align with the 1976 snowmelt, but was at least a week later. This meant the truck wasn't swept away by wind or storm. It was pushed into the lake when the ice was thin enough to crack, but thick enough to conceal through the remaining winter. Someone had calculated it, reviewed old topographic maps, then studied the faded Polaroids in the original file. In the photos, the truck was tilted, its location misaligned with Lauren's initial report. Instead of Cornsky Road, it was closer to the Kenai Bridge, exactly the area noted in his old notebook. Bridge. She placed the photos side by side, tapping the desk. The more she looked, the clearer the gaps became. She ordered the digitization of the entire old file, restoring faded text on carbon reports, and contacted the State Archive for Lauren's original signatures. Everything had to be rebuilt from scratch, like a puzzle someone had deliberately scrambled 40 years ago. That evening, leaving the office, McCabe paused at the cold case bulletin board. Annabelle Reed's black and white photo was pinned among dozens, her young face staring at the camera, eyes bright and calm. Below it, McCabe wrote in red pen, "Homicide reopened 2016. From that moment, Annabelle Reed's disappearance was no longer a storm-related accident. It was officially an unsolved homicide. And for those in the know, Kai's ice wasn't just melting on the lake. It was cracking deep into memories someone had tried to preserve for 40 years. In the first week after the case reopened, Detective Laura McCabe practically lived in the Alaska State Police's forensic lab. She set up a large whiteboard divided into 3 columns: old evidence, new evidence, unexplained connections under pale fluorescent lights. Data points were pinned up, linked by thin red threads like a spiderweb. In the center, McCabe wrote in bold black marker, "What really happened?" On the night of February 1976, the forensic team analyzed every detail from the Ford F-100. They extracted engine oil residue from the truck bed, black congealed clumps. After heating, extracting, and comparing with archived data, the results silenced the room. The oil didn't match the type used in 1975 Ford engines. Its chemical composition showed a specialized additive blend, used only in service trucks and police vehicles in the 1970s. McCabe ordered the report printed, reading each line carefully. In other words, she concluded, another vehicle, not Annabelle's, left traces in her truck bed. Simultaneously, another finding emerged from the forensic geology lab. The soil sample from the truck's rear door, preserved in a 1976 evidence bag, was analyzed using X-ray spectroscopy and mineral profiling. Results confirmed the soil contained high magnetite and red clay characteristic of the Kenai Bridge area, influenced by river sediment. In contrast, soil along California Road, the reported scene, was mostly fine beach sand with low iron content. The discrepancy was stark. McCabe flipped through old scene reports, all stating California Road, none mentioning the bridge. Yet in Harold Lauren's handwritten notebook found by state inspectors, bridge was clear. Why 2 different locations for the same scene? McCabe asked aloud, but no one answered. The room held only the hum of the air purifier and her pen tapping the desk. She requested all 1976 Kenai Police Department administrative data, service vehicle lists, oil types, and movement logs. Days later, A clerk sent a spreadsheet. Only one Jeep Wagoneer in the department's fleet used oil matching the sample from Annabelle's truck. It was assigned to Chief Harold Lorne. A note added that the vehicle was serviced 2 weeks before Annabelle's disappearance, with no usage reported on February 13th, the night she vanished. McCabe opened Lauren's old personnel file, reviewing his records, signatures, and work logs. Everything was clean, no violations, but that perfection unnerved her. A seasoned, meticulous chief, forgetting to log a service vehicle's movement or deliberately omitting it. She called the automotive forensics lab, requesting a check for collision marks on the Ford's rear. Under a microscope, the rear metal surface showed a long, faint circular dent matching the bumper mount of a 1975 Jeep Wagoneer. Not a strong impact, the technician said, more like a push than a crash. This meant the Ford F-100 was pushed from behind, sliding a few meters before sinking into mud. No brake mark suggested the driver didn't react, possibly because they weren't in the truck. McCabe pinned a photo of the dent to the board. Among the red threads, Harold Lauren's name appeared more than anyone's. She circled it, writing below, "Lauren's police vehicle may be the second vehicle at the scene." That evening, McCabe sat alone in her office, wind whistling through the window. On her desk, the old file lay open. Lauren's signed original report. In the scene evidence section, soil sample was crossed out in blue ink. A small handwritten note in the margin read, "Not relevant." McCabe froze. Lauren himself had decided to exclude the soil sample from evidence. Without that note, the case might have been seen differently. She opened her work journal, writing briefly, "The first person at the scene may know too much." Outside, Anchorage's sunset cast red light through dusty glass, illuminating the old files. McCabe closed her eyes briefly, as if hearing the wind howl through the forests of years past, the crunch of tires on snow, the silence of the Ford F-100 at the lake's bottom. For 40 years, all clues pointed one way, but she knew cases buried in ice don't melt easily. And if the man who led the investigation was hiding the truth, that ice was thicker than Kenai's snow. McCabe decided the next step was no longer in the lab, but in the memories of those who lived through 1976. She compiled a list of people from the original case file, Annabelle's friends, colleagues, search team officers, and anyone who might recall even a single detail. After 40 years, many had moved away. Some had passed. Others refused to revisit the past. But 2 names stood out as must-meet for McCabe: Mark Evans, Annabelle's ex-boyfriend, and Dale Horn, an officer on the 1976 search team. Mark Evans lived in Anchorage, now running a small gas station off the highway. The nearly 70-year-old man was stooped, his face etched with lines from sun and wind. When McCabe arrived, he was fixing a truck, the air thick with oil. At the mention of Annabelle Reed, he paused, silent for a moment before saying, 40 years. But I still remember that night clearly. They sat in a small office out back, walls lined with old license plates. Maid turned on her recorder, asking softly, "Were you the last to see Annabelle at the dance?" Evans nodded. She smiled, told me to head home first. Snow was starting. I didn't think it'd be the last time I saw her. His voice dropped, then continued. When the police came, I cooperated fully. But Harold Lauren, he wasn't like the others. He came to my house 3 times, each time wanting me to resign my statement. McCabe raised an eyebrow. "Resign?" Evans nodded. "My first statement said I left the dance around 10:00. Later he told me to change it to 8:30, saying it matched other witnesses. I didn't understand, but he gave me a look that made me not want to argue. When I hesitated, he put the pen in my hand and said, 'If you don't want trouble, sign it.' I was just a 20-year-old kid. I signed. McCabe asked, 'Do you have a copy of that statement?' Evans shook his head, giving a faint smile. 'They didn't give me one, but I remember clearly. After that, they stopped questioning me.' McCabe thanked him, noting every word. Before she left, Evans added, voice with emotion, 'You know what haunts me most? the night Annabelle vanished. I drove home via the Kenai Bridge and saw a dark, cold Jeep's lights parked by the road. I thought it was a patrol, so I didn't think much of it. The next morning, hearing she was gone, I told Lauren. He said I was mistaken, that no vehicle was there. He paused, eyes distant. Now you mentioned police vehicle oil. Maybe I wasn't wrong. Maid stayed silent for a long time, then said only, I believe you remember correctly. She left Anchorage in the gloomy afternoon, heading to Kenai. There she met Dale Horn, a retired officer who led the first 1976 search team. Horn lived in a small wooden house by the forest. When McCabe knocked, he recognized her badge and invited her in. Pouring hot coffee. I heard on the radio they found the truck, he began. I knew someone would come asking sooner or later. McCabe briefed him, then asked, What do you remember about the first search night? Horn smiled, but it carried a hint of sadness. How could I forget? The wind was so cold my ears burned. We split into groups following Lauren's map. I clearly remember. He told us to focus on California Road, but he drove toward the Kenai Bridge himself. When I asked, he said he was just checking. When he returned, he said nothing. Just nothing there, McCabe noted. What was his vehicle? A dark green Jeep Wagoneer. Official plate, 47KN. Horn sipped his coffee, looking out the frosted window. That night when the wind died down, I saw vehicle lights reflecting on the snow exactly like a service jeep. It was parked near the bridge, not far from where the Ford was found. I radioed to ask who was in that area. No one answered. Later, I mentioned it to Lauren. He said it might have been another patrol, but Kai only had 4 service vehicles then, and the other 3 were with me. Did you report it? McCabe asked. Horn shook his head. No, Lauren said. It wasn't needed. He signed all the final reports and sent them to the county. I was just a junior officer who had argued. McCabe watched Horn's hands rough, trembling slightly on the coffee mug. Did you ever suspect him? Horn sighed, eyes heavy. I thought something was off, but back then he was my boss, the first at the scene. Who'd think a police chief could be involved with a missing girl? She left Horn's house as night fell. A mix of drizzle and snow falling. In her car, McCabe opened her notebook, underlining 3 lines. Mark Evans pressured to sign statement. Dale Horn saw service jeep near bridge. Lauren, no soil sample reported. 3 scattered pieces now fitting like threads on an old map. Back in Anchorage, McCabe turned on her desk lamp, spreading out the 1976 reports. At the bottom of each, H. Lauren was signed in steady black ink. No hesitations, no corrections. But in that perfection, McCabe sensed something cold and empty, like the ice on Lake Kenai, silent, reflecting everything but hiding a bottomless darkness beneath. 2 weeks after meeting Horn, McCabe returned to Kai to access the county's old archive, where the Annabelle Reed case began. The building sat behind the administrative offices, its cracked cement walls and rusted moss-dotted roof a testament to time. Inside, dim yellow light from low-hanging bulbs cast shadows on dusty iron shelves. The air smelled of mold, metal, and old paper. McCabe signed the access log, then with an archivist opened old file boxes labeled 1970-1980. In a low shelf's corner between 2 unlabeled boxes, she found a dusty metal canister, its color nearly blending with the surrounding grime. A faded handwritten label read, Can ID Field Film, February 1976, the archivist whispered. Probably seen footage from back then, but it's not in the catalogue. McCabe carefully wrapped and sealed it, taking it to the department's imaging lab. The dark room was prepared that afternoon. When the film was removed from the canister, the celluloid was dry and curled, but intact. The technician hand-processed it, images emerging under faint red light. McCod behind the glass, her pulse slowing as the first image appeared. A truck cabin. Clearly the Ford F-100 filled the frame. A flashlight beam lit the dashboard through a misty window. The cold seemed frozen in the photo, everything veiled in a thin haze. In the left corner, reflected in the glass, was a faint oval shape. Maid requested a zoom in. When printed, the outline clarified the KIPD badge on the sleeve of the flashlight holder. She held her breath. "You sure?" the technician asked. McCabe nodded, pointing to the photo's edge. "See this reflection? It's a 1975 Maglights beam and thick halo. Only that model had such a narrow, distinct light back then." She checked the 1976 equipment list in Cayey. Only 3 officers had early Maglights: Dale Horn, Sergeant John Nash, and Harold Lauren. "But Horn said he was with the South Search Team that night," McCabe said softly. "Nash was on station duty, so the other person she trailed off." The technician handed her the second photo, an exterior shot, a man's shadow cast on the truck's side. His face wasn't clear, but he was tall, wearing a cap, arm holding the flashlight angled toward the driver's door. The light reflected again through the glass. Same badge outline. McCabe closed her eyes, picturing that night, wind howling, snow falling. The lone truck by the lake, and a man, not a rescuer, but someone controlling everything from the start. She ordered the entire film digitized and enhanced for contrast. On the screen, a faint light from another vehicle shone behind, reflecting on the snow. Zooming in, McCabe spotted the chrome bumper glint, distinctive to a police Jeep Wagoneer. The evidence didn't speak aloud, but each detail aligned. The Jeep, the flashlight, the KIPD badge, the bridge location, all matching Horn's and Evans' accounts. Lauren wasn't just the investigation's leader. He was likely the first and only one at the scene before anyone else. Leaving the dark room, McCabe felt a cold draft in the hallway, carrying the scent of paper and dust. She paused at a window, looking at the snow-dusted parking lot, her heart heavy. A small, forgotten film reel had become the case's missing piece. And it didn't just illuminate Annabelle Reed's truck cabin. It shone directly into the darkness of the man who held Kai's highest authority that winter, Harold Lauren. After reviewing the restored film, McCabe knew the time for confrontation had come. The reflected KIPD badge in the Ford F-100's cabin wasn't speculation. It was visible evidence, but she needed something undeniable, something tying Lauren to the victim's scientifically DNA. In an internal memo to the Alaska State Prosecutor, McCabe detailed the new findings and requested a warrant for Lauren's biological samples, noting he was 77 and living with his wife in suburban Palmer. "This is no longer a hypothesis," she wrote, "but a justified criminal suspicion. There's sufficient basis to confirm Harold Lauren's physical presence at the scene." The warrant was approved in 3 days. On Monday morning, McCabe and 2 investigators drove to Palmer. Lauren's house nestled among pines, its gray wood walls weathered, a faded American flag hanging on the porch. When McCabe approached, he was waiting, thinner, white-haired, but his eyes still sharp. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said, voice low and steady. McCabe presented the warrant, explaining the procedure briefly. He nodded slightly, offering no resistance. A medical technician took cheek swabs and hair samples in absolute silence. Before they left, Lauren added, 40 years gone. But in this place, the snow still knows how to hide. "You sure you found something?" Maid replied calmly. "No matter how deep it's buried, we'll dig to the bottom." The DNA samples were sent to Anchorage's lab. Technicians began isolating and comparing them with scene evidence. Microscopic skin cells on the inner side of the AR engraved silver necklace and a hair strand in Annabelle's gray coat. Both had been carefully preserved. The comparison took over a week. When results arrived, McCabe was at the lab early. On the screen, genetic sequence charts showed even peaks. The technician pointed, "This is from the necklace. This is from his swab." The lines matched perfectly. She requested a second comparison with the coat's hair. Results unchanged. A 99.8% match. No coincidence possible. Maid stared silently at the flashing red-green data. In that moment, she felt something colder than an Alaskan winter. The truth, after 40 years, finally had a voice. Skin cells on Annabelle's necklace, worn nearly always, bore Lauren's trace. No doubt remained he had touched it. The only question was when, before or after her death. In her official report, McCabe wrote, "Harold Lauren's DNA matches biological samples on the victim's personal item. Evidence confirms direct contact between the suspect and victim around the time of the incident." Conclusion: Lauren was at the scene or had physical contact with the victim the night of the incident. She pinned a copy of the results to the investigation board next to the film photos, showing the Kenai PD logo's reflection. Below them, she wrote in red, "Not just the first at the scene. He never left." As night fell in Anchorage, McCabe sat alone in her office. Outside, streetlights cast faint glows on the thin ice forming on the road. She opened her work journal, writing briefly, "Physical evidence confirms direct contact between Harold Lauren and Annabelle Reed. No longer a question of who, but why." Somewhere in Palmer's old house, the former Kenai police chief was likely awake, listening to wind rattle the wooden roof, as if it were counting down to a truth he could no longer hide. With DNA confirming direct contact between Harold Lauren and Annabelle Reed, McCabe knew she'd crossed from suspicion to proof. But one question lingered. Why? Why would a police chief, a town icon, be linked to a 19-year-old's mysterious disappearance? No murder case truly closes without a motive, and McCabe understood that to find it, she had to return to where it all began. Inside the Kai Police Department of 1975-1976, old administrative records were stored in Anchorage's Central Archive, a deep basement filled with iron shelves and worn cardboard boxes. When the archivist opened the catalogue, McCabe requested all personnel files, internal reports, and complaints related to Harold Lauren from that period. "It'll take time," the clerk said. "Any documents aren't digitized," McCabe replied simply. "I have time." 3 days later, she sat before a thick stack of yellowed papers, corners stuck with old tape. Most were routine meeting minutes, duty rosters, commendation records. But in a thin folder labeled Personnel Complaints, Confidential, McCabe found something no one had mentioned in 40 years. Between 2 faded pages was an internal complaint dated February 4, 1976, just over a week before Annal vanished. Sender intern, name withheld. Target Chief Harold Lauren. The brief text in shaky handwriting read, "The named individual engaged in inappropriate, intimate behavior during work hours. I felt threatened if I didn't comply." No author's name, but a note at the bottom described female intern, 19, handling administrative filing. McCabe paused. Annabelle Reed had worked part-time at the Kai police station, managing records in the late afternoons. Her pulse quickened as she turned the page. There in Lauren's handwriting was a note. "Spoke privately with the individual. No issue." Below was his signature dated February 7th, 6 days before Annal's disappearance. McCabe requested verification of Annabelle's personnel record at the Kenai department. Her name appeared on the January-February 1976 temporary staff list. A pencil note read "left position due to personal reasons 2.3s. The day she vanished, she immediately cross-checked the internal correspondence, logged from that time in order to withdraw an internal complaint from the archive dated February 20th, 1976, a week after the disappearance was reported. Bohr's signature, the log noted. Complaint file 17 archived under supervision, but no destination was listed. When McCabe asked the archivist, they shook their head. File time 17 doesn't exist in the Central Archive. It may have been permanently removed. The pieces began to align. Annabelle was an intern at the Key Department. Lauren, then in his 30s, married, directly supervised her. An inappropriate, possibly non-consensual relationship formed. When Annal threatened to speak out, he silenced her. McCabe sat alone in the archive, fluorescent light illuminating the old paper. The trembling words, "I felt threatened if I didn't comply," sent a chill down her spine. She photocopied the documents, placed them in a hard folder, and signed the sealing log. Back in Anchorage, McCabe met the state prosecutor to present her findings. If this is true, the prosecutor said he had a strong motive to cover it up. You think Annal threatened to report him? McCabe nodded. I think she did, and he couldn't control that. She opened her laptop displaying the scanned complaint, pointing to Lauren's signature. He confirmed speaking privately with her. 6 days later, she vanished. A week after, he withdrew the complaint from the archive. The prosecutor was silent for a long time, then said, "We need someone who knew about this relationship." They tracked down a name, Rita Haskell, the 1976 Kind Department's administrative secretary, now living in Fairbanks. McCabe flew to meet her. Rita, over 80, had a slow but sharp memory for the past. She clearly recalled the young intern Annabelle. She brought coffee for everyone, always smiling. When Maid asked about Harold Lauren, Rita looked out the window, her voice slowing. I saw them in the file room after hours. Door closed. I said nothing. But a few days later, Annabelle came to me, looking scared. She said she was quitting and wouldn't let him touch her again. Then she was gone. McCabe asked, "Did you tell anyone?" Rita shook her head. "I told the deputy chief, but he said not to meddle in the boss's business." A few weeks later, the complaint vanished from the file cabinet. Leaving Rita's house, Maid stepped into light snow on the wooden porch, the afternoon light reflecting dimly on the icy road. She gripped the file tightly, piecing together the timeline in her mind. Complaint, private talk, threat, disappearance, file withdrawal. It fit perfectly. That night in her work journal, McCabe wrote, "The motive is clear. Annabelle Reed didn't die by accident. She was killed for knowing what she shouldn't, for daring to speak what no one else would. Harold Lauren chose the only way to keep her silent. Outside, the sky was pitch black, northern winds carrying tiny snowflakes against the glass. In the heater's hum, McCabe knew Kenai's ice wasn't just a winter symbol. It was the cold shell a man used to bury his guilt, and now it was cracking, revealing the dark mud below where the truth was finally rising to the surface. In August 2017, after 4 months of relentless investigation, Detective Laura McCabe formally submitted a request to the state prosecutor for a search warrant for Harold Lauren's home. The 200-plus page file included DNA evidence, the old film reel, and the 1976 internal complaint that had been concealed. The federal court approved it within 48 hours. The warrant allowed a full search of Lauren's Palmer property, including the main house, backyard shed, and any vehicles or personal storage that might hold case-related documents for Annabelle Reed. On the morning of August 14th, the Alaskan sky was heavy with gray clouds, fog blanketing the pine ridges. A 7-person investigation team arrived at Lauren's gate at 6 a.m. The weathered gray wooden house, surrounded by a low fence, emerged silently through the mist like a ghost. When they knocked, Lauren stepped out, slow white hair disheveled, wearing a thick jacket despite the mild air. "I figured you'd come eventually," he said, voice devoid of surprise. McCabe showed the warrant explaining the process. Lauren nodded, unresisting, sighing as he stepped aside to let them in. The search began on the ground floor. The living room was tidy, black and white photos lining the hallway, mostly of Lauren in uniform, award ceremonies, and a few of Kenai's snowy landscapes. On a bookshelf, McCabe noticed a locked wooden cabinet. When a technician broke the lock, they found dozens of thin files, some typed, others handwritten. Among them was a large creased scene map, marked with red ink. McCabe instantly recognized the familiar lines, the same sketch described in the old notebook. A bridge marker, not California ski. In the map's corner, a signature H. Lawrence, February 1976. Beneath the map was a small wooden box. Inside, lined with black velvet, lay a silver necklace engraved with art, identical to the one found in Annabelle's truck. But what stopped McCabe was the metal shine, too new to have been buried under water for 40 years. She lifted it with tongs, ordering it sealed. "We need to check its manufacturer date," she said quietly. Continuing in the study, They found a tin box filled with old photos, mostly case scene shots. Many matched the unprocessed film McCade had recovered, but some were new to the file. One showed the Ford F-100 from a high angle, a flashlight beam piercing the cabin, clearly taken by someone present the first night. At the photo's edge, the faint, keen IPD badge reflection lingered. Lauren had kept them all items that should have been submitted to the official case file. Maid studied the photos, a chill running down her spine. Why had he kept them for so long? To hide them or to remind himself of something unspeakable? As technicians continued collecting documents, she returned to the necklace, examining it closely. The back bore a small engraving JM77. McCade instantly recognized it as the mark of Johnson and Meyer, a long-standing Kenai jeweler. 2 days later, verification results turned suspicion into truth. The necklace was crafted in July 1977, over a year after Annabelle's disappearance. The jeweler's ledger confirmed. Ordered silver pendant engraved Arcliant H. Lauren. When questioned, the elderly jeweler said, "I remember that man. He said he wanted a replica of an old piece for family keepsake." McCabe read the receipt copy, anger rising. In the 1976 file, the necklace found in Annabelle's truck was the sole victim identification evidence. If Lauren made an identical replica a year later, it could only mean one thing. He created a false clue to mislead any future investigation. At the state office, McCabe presented her supplemental report. She spread out the old map, placing it beside photos of the necklace and scene. "He didn't just kill her," she told the prosecutor. "He staged the scene to look like an accident." The fake necklace was bait meant to be found if anyone reopened the case. That evening, as the team left Lauren's house, light rain fell over Palmer. Lauren stood on the porch watching them load evidence boxes onto the truck. The red glow of police lights reflected on his pale face, eyes sunken, both weary and resigned. McCade said nothing. She knew the game was nearly over. A man who believed ice could hide the truth was watching it melt before him. Back in Anchorage, she wrote in her work journal, "Search completed. Found original map, unpublished photos, and fake necklace crafted in 1977. Conclusion: Harold Lauren deliberately created false evidence to misdirect the investigation, concealing his crime." Outside, rain turned to snow, falling lightly on the window, melting into faint streaks. McCade closed her journal, sitting still for a long time. In the wind's howl outside, she could almost hear a faint crack, the sound of Lake Kenai's ice splitting further, slow but unstoppable. On September 4, 2017, after receiving the final report from the investigation team and forensic lab, the Kenai District Court formally issued an arrest warrant for Harold Lauren on charges of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. The warrant was signed at 7:45 a.m. by Federal Judge Margaret Willard. As the ink dried, 41 years of silence for File 760204. An Alaska State Task Force left Anchorage before dawn. The September sky was overcast fog, cloaking the roadside pines. McCade sat in the SUV's back seat, clutching the case file. The evidence was now complete. DNA, film reel, internal complaint, scene map, and fake necklace. She glanced through the window. Rare highway lights drifted past in the fog, like the headlights from the night Annabelle vanished. When the convoy reached Palmer, it was 9 a.m. Lauren's wooden house stood silent among the trees, windows shut, thin smoke rising from the chimney. Officers fanned out, securing the perimeter. McCade and the task force leader approached the porch, knocking 3 times firmly. A brief silence, then footsteps. The door opened. Harold Lauren stood there still in his thick grey jacket, holding a steaming coffee mug. His face was pale but unsurprised. "I knew," he said softly. "I knew this day would come." Maid read the warrant aloud, her voice steady and firm. As 2 officers stepped forward, Lauren set the mug on the porch step, extended his hands, and offered no resistance. The cuffs clicked shut, the cold metal sound sharp in the still air. Before they let him away, Mudd asked, "Anything you want to say?" Lauren looked around, his gaze lingering on the fog-draped pines behind the yard. His voice was almost a whisper. "I thought the snow could cover it all." He lowered his head, walking slowly with the officers. While Lauren was escorted to Anchorage, a forensic team conducted a supplemental property search. In the backyard's corner, they found an area of disturbed soil seemingly dug and refilled long ago. Technicians took samples for analysis. The results silenced the team. The soil's mineral composition matched the Lake Kenai sediment exactly, including magnetite, red clay, and coarse sand, a rare mix unique to the lake bed where the Ford F-100 was found. McCade received the results that evening. She stared at the report, rereading the comparison figures. The match was near perfect, 99.6%. Lauren hadn't just been at the scene, he'd brought its soil back. Likely mud from the Jeep wagon's tires dumped in his yard, never expecting a future check. A small detail, but enough to close the final door he could hide behind. The Alaska State Forensic Lab received Detective Laura McCade's final request days after Lauren's arrest. Reconstruct the entire incident in 3D, using all physical evidence. "I want to see what really happened that night," she told the lab chief, "not just numbers. I want movement, impact, light, and force direction." The process took nearly a month. The Ford F-100 was laser scanned, every dent and rust patch digitized. The team reconstructed a 1975 Jeep Wagoneer from KI Department maintenance records. They input February 13, 1976 weather data. Northeast wind at 20 Mamosampe, 28 degrees C, lake ice about 18 in thick. Each factor was programmed precisely to simulate the scene. When the model was complete, McCade, prosecutors, and technicians gathered in a special projection room. The large screen showed Kai's lakeside road at night, snow stretching endlessly, bare trees, headlights casting faint glows in the fog. Two vehicles were positioned, the Ford F-100 ahead, the Jeep Wagoneer behind, about 6 minutes apart. Old film images, the scene map, and truck metal traces were integrated into the model. As the technician activated the simulation, the sound of tires crunching snow played. Faint and sharp, the Jeep approached the Ford's rear slowly, estimated at 810 mph. On contact, the model showed a dent on the bumper, a circular curve matching the Ford's rear mark, noted by forensics. The push was just enough to slide the front vehicle 2.8 meters, the exact distance from the road's edge to the lake. No brake marks were recorded. The Ford's rear wheels sank into weak mud. Then half the body slid into the water. The technician paused, zooming in on the impact point. The metal surfaces aligned perfectly. Under scanned light, scratches appeared. Same direction, same depth, no doubt. The expert said the Ford's metal marks came from the 1976 police Jeep Wagoneer's bumper. They matched to the millimeter. Maid watched the screen, then turned to the prosecutor. He pushed her into the lake. Not an accident, intentional. As technicians continued, they presented another finding. Among evidence from Lauren's house was a small fabric piece stuck in the Jeep seat seam, a synthetic wool blend, light gray. Forensics matched it to fabric on Annabelle's coat, with nearly identical fiber composition and dye sequence. "She may have been in the Jeep," McCade said, "or pulled across its seat." They reran the model, hypothesizing Annabelle left the dance, driving home, stopped near the Kenai Bridge. Lauren, on duty in the service Jeep, approached her. Perhaps a conversation, perhaps coercion. An argument erupted. She threatened to expose his harassment. In panic, he lost control. Annabelle was struck, dazed, then placed back in her truck. Lauren started the Jeep, pushed the Ford into the lake as the ice weakened, believing snow would cover it all. When the simulation ended, the room was silent, save for the computer fan and slow breaths. Maid stood approaching the screen, staring at the Ford sinking into dark water. "That's the moment he thought it was over," she said softly. But he forgot ice melts. In the concluding forensic report to the court, the team wrote, "Physical, chemical, and dynamic simulation analysis confirms the force causing the Ford F-100 to slide off the road was deliberate mechanical impact, not natural drift or accident. Bumper marks and rear dents fully match the 1976 police Jeep Wagoneer used by Harold Lauren. Jeep seat fabric matches the victim's coat fibers. Conclusion: direct physical contact between victim and suspect. The service vehicle was used in the crime. That evening, McCade received a digital copy of the 3D model. Back in her office, she played the video, watching the truck slide into the lake under a grey-silver glow. 41 years condensed into seconds, cold and precise as metal-piercing snow. She opened her journal, writing the day's final note. Forensic team confirms the Ford was pushed into the lake by mechanical force. No accident, no room for doubt. Outside Anchorage's window, night fell quietly. Far off, lights reflected on water like fractured beams, evoking the sinking truck and justice, though slow, finally rising from the icy lake bed. Harold Lauren's interrogation took place on September 18, 2017. In room 4 of the Alaska State Police in Anchorage, the small room had gray walls, white light glaring down on a metal table. Lauren sat at the far end, hands loosely cuffed, posture straight but eyes sunken. McCabe entered, placing a thick file on the table topped with a yellowed Polaroid. Before sitting, she said softly, almost a greeting, "It's been 41 years, Mr. Lauren." He looked up, his gaze slow and different. "I know time doesn't bury everything." The interrogation lasted nearly 6 hours. For the first 2, Lauren maintained the calm of a seasoned interrogator himself. He repeated the decades-old story. "That night, I was called to the scene for a stuck vehicle report. I got there, saw no one. I thought she was lost, so I called for backup. When McCade asked why no call was logged, he said the radio system was spotty. I might have forgotten to report it." Each answer seemed rehearsed, emotionless, flawless. 3 hours in, Maid placed the DNA results, old film photos, and the bridge scene map on the table. Her voice remained even. "You were the first there. We have you in the truck's cabin." Flashlight reflecting the Kenai PD badge. Skin cells on Annabelle's necklace match your DNA. Soil from your yard matches Lake Kenai sediment. "Want to revise your statement?" Lauren leaned back, staring silently at the photo. "I thought that ice would keep the secret," he said quietly. McCond opening a small evidence box. Inside was the shiny AR fake necklace. She set it beside the original from the truck. "You had this made in 1977. The jeweler confirmed it. Care to explain why?" Lauren stared long, then closed his eyes as if hearing a distant echo. "I just wanted to believe she wasn't down there. That a copy could make me forget the real one." Maid pressed on, sliding the Polaroid toward him. "This is your photo from that night. Truck cabin flashlight reflection. You kept it at home for 40 years. Why?" Lauren didn't look, lips tightening. The room was still, only the faint tap of her pen. 1 minute, 2, then he spoke, voice low, trembling slightly. "I never meant to kill her. I just wanted to talk. She threatened to tell my wife, everyone at the station. I lost my temper. She got in her truck to leave. I blocked her. I only wanted to scare her, to keep her quiet." Maid kept her tone steady. "But she didn't go home, Mr. Lauren." He nodded slowly. "I know." After a pause, he continued. "She fell, hit her head on the door. I wasn't sure she was breathing. I panicked. My whole life I'd been the model chief, the law's protector. In that moment I was just a scared man. I pulled her into her truck, drove it. When I reached the lake, I didn't know what I was doing anymore." Maid watched him silent. He gave a dry, hollow laugh. "I remember the feeling. Snow under the tires, ice cracking. I thought pushing the truck into the lake would hide it all. No one would find it. I could keep living, keep being the town's hero." He looked up, eyes cloudy like fog. "And I was right for 40 years. The snow covered it all." "Until now," McCade said. He nodded, head bowed. "Right until now." She opened her notebook, writing each word. "Suspect admits to pushing the victim's truck into Lake Kenai to conceal her death." Then she looked up, asking one last time, Anything to add to the record? Lauren stared at the necklace, his thin hands stiffening. His voice was faint as wind. I pulled the truck into the lake. I didn't want anyone to know. Didn't want them to know a man like me could do that. Maid turned off the recorder. In that brief moment, the room was utterly silent. She gathered her papers, signaling the two officers to escort him. As they led Lauren out, he glanced back, eyes empty. "You know the worst part, Detective?" he asked. Maid paused. "For 40 years I thought I'd buried it all, but no one buries the cold of snow. It keeps everything." The door closed, the lock clicking sharply. Maid stood still, hand on her notebook. Inside, the ink was still warm. Lauren admits to pulling the victim's truck into Lake Kenai, confirming criminal concealment. Outside, Anchorage's sun was setting, faint red light reflecting on melting snow. The snow Lauren once believed could hide his guilt, now dissolving, revealing a truth he could never bury. Harold Lauren's trial began on November 7, 2017, at the Anchorage Federal Courthouse. The sky was cold and gloomy, fog blanketing the roads, bare branches trembling outside the windows. People arrived early. Reporters, former colleagues, aging Kearney residents, all wanting to witness the end of a case buried for 41 years. In the courtroom, the air was thick, as if winter itself paused to listen. Harold Lauren was led in, wearing a pale grey sweater uncuffed. He walked slowly, sitting in the defendant's chair, back straight, hands clasped. He still resembled the chief of old, calm, disciplined, sharp-eyed, but his face now bore the wear of age and remorse. When Judge Ellen Baker read the case name, Lauren only nodded, silent. In the back row, Detective Laura McCabe sat quietly, case file on her lap, containing everything she and her team had uncovered. Every piece of ice melted from the past. Prosecutor James Corbett opened with a steady, low voice. "Your Honor, this is not just a murder case. It's proof of how truth was buried under ice, and evidence that no matter how long it takes, justice finds its way." He projected a timeline of evidence. The film reel reflecting the KIPD badge in the truck cabin, the bridge scene map, matching DNA, and the fake silver necklace Lauren commissioned in 1977. Each item on the large screen was named, annotated and cross-referenced with original reports. When the slide shifted to soil analysis, prosecutor called forensic geologist Sarah Halley to the stand. She stated, "Soil from the Ford F-100's rear door and Lauren's yard share identical mineral composition. Magnetite, red clay, and coarse sand unique to Lake Kenai's bed. This indicates a common sediment source. It cannot be coincidence." Next, a mechanical forensic expert presented oil analysis. Oil traces in the truck bed didn't come from a Ford engine. The composition matches oil used in the 1975 police Jeep Wagoneer, the only such vehicle in Kai's fleet, used by defendant Harold Lauren. On the screen, the 3D model from forensics appeared. Kai, February 1976. Thick snow, dim moonlight, the Jeep behind the Ford. The motion simulation showed the push, impact, and the Ford sliding off the road, sinking into the lake. Red, blue, and yellow trajectories overlapped like a cold physics symphony. When it ended, the room was silent. The prosecutor stepped forward, pointing at the screen. No accident could create this trajectory. This was deliberate. Lauren pushed the fort into the lake to hide Annabelle Reed's death. He later crafted false evidence, necklace, photos, map, to misdirect investigation. For 41 years it lay under ice. But DNA, soil, and light from an old film reel spoke for the truth. The prosecution submitted the evidence chain, unprocessed film, hair on the victim's coat matching DNA, the map from Lauren's cabinet. Each detail pierced time, stitching shut the gaps Lauren had tried to tear open. When called, McCade took the witness stand. Her voice was calm. "When I reopened this file, I saw only yellowed papers and a no criminal evidence conclusion. But each piece, when assembled, told a different story. Lauren wasn't justice's protector. He used it to hide his guilt." She recounted the house search, finding the shiny fake necklace, the internal complaint withdrawn from the archive, and Lauren's own confession. "I pulled the truck into the lake. I didn't want anyone to know." The judge listened, hand lightly touching her chin, face expressionless. When the prosecution rested, all evidence was entered into the court record. The defense attorney spoke briefly. "My client doesn't deny his actions. He asked the court to consider his mental state, a moment of lost control, a single mistake that ruined his life." His voice was low, lacking conviction. Throughout the trial, Harold Lawrence sat still. He didn't object or look around. When the simulation replayed, the truck sliding on snow, sinking into the lake, he bowed his head, hands clenching. Some in the gallery saw his shoulders tremble, but none knew if it was emotion or exhaustion. During a recess, maid stepped into the hallway. Snow began falling outside the glass, catching the golden light. She stood still, watching flakes spin and melt on the window. Transparent and fragile, unlike 40 years ago, this time the snow wasn't thick enough to hide anything. In the afternoon, the trial resumed. The prosecution closed with a single sentence, unscripted. "No one can bring Annabelle Reed back. But today the ice has melted and justice is finally seen." The courtroom was silent. Harold Lauren kept his head bowed, hands gripped, unmoving. When the judge adjourned for deliberation, McCabe looked at him one last time. In the cold white light of Anchorage's courtroom, the man who believed snow could hide everything was now just a shadow of himself, silent, fading in the winter he'd used to conceal his crime. On the morning of November 14, 2017, after 3 days of deliberation, the Anchorage jury returned to the courtroom with somber faces. The sky outside was heavy gray, gusts of wind carrying shimmering snow dust past the windows. In the gallery, the crowd was nearly breathless. Harold Lauren sat upright, hands on the table, his cloudy, sunken eyes showing no emotion. Detective Laura McCabe stood behind the witness row, still holding a thin case file containing the evidence that brought this case to its end. Judge Ellen Baker nodded to the jury foreman. The middle-aged man stood holding a folded paper, his voice with tension. "On the charge of secondary murder, we could not conclude premeditation. However, on the charges of manslaughter and obstruction of justice, the jury is unanimous guilty." The words rang clear, echoing in the cold room's air. A faint murmur rose and faded. Lauren closed his eyes, exhaling, no objection, no surprise. It was as if he'd heard something he'd long known. The judge read the verdict. "Defendant Harold Lauren, you abused your authority to conceal the truth, manipulate the investigation, and cause irreparable loss to the victim's family. This court sentences you to 25 years in prison without parole. This sentence is not only for Annabelle Reed, but to affirm that the law never sides with silence." McCabe looked up, her gaze not triumphant, only weary calm. 41 years of a cold case closed in a few short sentences, but behind them were hundreds of days she'd spent poring over files, sleepless nights haunted by fragments of the past. Harold Lauren was asked to stand for the formal sentencing. He nodded, offering no defense. When the judge asked if he had final words, he spoke softly, his voice nearly dissolving into the hum of the fan. "I lived half my life believing snow could hide everything. But snow only makes things look peaceful. The cold preserves it all." A moment of utter silence followed. The judge's pen scratched. Then her gavel struck. Court adjourned. Lauren was cuffed and led away slowly. Passing the front row, he dipped his head slightly toward McCabe. She didn't respond, only watched him long, not with anger or pity, just the closure of a story too long. In the hallway, reporters crowded, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Do you think justice was served?" McCabe answered briefly. "Justice isn't measured by time but by the truth being found." A week later, the verdict was logged in the Alaska State Police Archives with a special note. Case Banjaya 760214. Kai cold case closed by forensic evidence. Precedent for forensic resolution of cold cases. The press dubbed it the Alaska Cold Miracle, a frozen triumph of justice. Forensics cited the case in textbooks, describing it as a landmark, proving the power of DNA and mineral analysis in reopening lost cases in Kai. Winter arrived early that year. A small sign was erected by the lake where the Ford F-100 was found in memory of Annabelle Reed. 1957-1976, found not forgotten. Locals stopped by, leaving dried flowers or a red knit hat like the one she wore the night she vanished. Maid returned to Kai one last time that year. Standing by the lake's edge, watching new ice form, she knelt, touching the cold surface, the sunset glinting through the thin water, sparkling like glass. In that moment, she thought of Annabelle, the dozens of other files still lying silent in cabinets, and Lauren's words. "Snow keeps everything." "You're right," she whispered. And that's how we find the truth. Back in Anchorage, McCabe submitted her final report. The Annabelle Reed case proves time doesn't destroy evidence. It only changes its form. As science advances, the ice of the past melts, leaving traces no one can deny. On the Cold Case Unit's memorial board, Annabelle's photo was pinned. A 19-year-old smiling in a red knit hat beside the words, "Closed, justice achieved." Outside, snow fell again, light, clear, silent. No longer a veil for guilt, but a white testament to justice finally finding its way home. The story of the Annabelle Reed case, Alaska 1976, cold case solved, is not just a journey to reclaim justice after 41 years, but a profound reminder of the power of truth, technology, and human persistence, values still vital in American society today. In modern America, where trust in the justice system is sometimes tested, this case is a mirror reflecting that nothing is truly forgotten, only waiting for someone patient enough to dig to the end. The unprocessed film reel, forgotten for 4 decades, yet holding the reflected KIPD badge, symbolizes that truth always exists, needing only someone brave enough to look back. Like today's society, many issues from racial justice to domestic violence to systemic corruption have their own unprocessed reels waiting to be illuminated. McCabe, with her belief that ice doesn't hide everything, embodies the American spirit, daring to confront, to redo, to trust that science and truth can heal past wrongs. The clearest lesson from this story is never underestimate the power of persistence and scientific justice. In an era where misinformation, bias, and silence can cloud conscience, everyone must be their own McCabe, daring to question, to seek evidence, to face truth, no matter how cold, like Alaskan ice. Only by confronting the past can society move forward, and justice, though late, remains unbared. If you believe no truth stays buried under ice forever, subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more of America's cold cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video where we'll uncover another mystery that slept too long in the dark.